This year, London hosted the 2009 World Conference of Science Journalists, bringing together radio, print and television reporters from across the globe to discuss the art of reporting on science. Predictably, new media was a popular topic of discussion, and so in this special programme for the World Conference, we've crystallised the main talking points for you. We'll be talking tech with the BBC's Rory Cellan-Jones. We'll find out why the internet's helping to raise the bar in science reporting across the world. We'll discover how pods and blogs are helping to get stories out of the third world and at the same time get science into developing countries. Hello, I'm Chris Smith from thenakedscientist.com. And first up, to the big question, can you make a podcast? Science Magazine's John Bohannon ran a workshop to teach people the basics.
It's called Pimp My Podcast, and in essence, it's the bloodiest, simplest way to make a podcast possible.
Who are you aiming at?
I'm aiming at people who have never touched a recorder before, but would love to get their stories into sound.
Are these sort of podophobes, or are they just people that are keen but just have never had a reason to make a podcast?
I don't think they're so much podophobes as technophobes in general. Maybe they're not really phobic. Maybe they're actually podophilic, but haven't been able to touch the medium yet.
How are you going to try and get them to embrace this technology?
Right, so the plan is to make them create a podcast in the space of time that I have right now, which is 2 hours max, which really comes down to sort of half an hour of actual hands-on. And they do the full arc from coming up with an idea in small groups to recording it, to editing it in the simplest way possible, right here in front of everyone, and then we listen to it. And I have a science editor, Rich Stone, our Beijing correspondent, coming in to critique them.
We'll come back later to find out whether John successfully pimped a few podcasts later in the programme. But first, before we venture into the world of new media, what's happened to traditional media?
My name's Rory Cellan-Jones, and I'm the BBC's technology correspondent. I've been in broadcasting for more than 25 years, and what's changed radically in the last 5 or 10 years is that there are a whole new set of tools available not just to journalists, but to the audience out there. I come from a tradition of working with very good, very specialist craftspeople who shoot pictures, record audio, take still photographs and so on, while I get on with my basic job of reporting. Suddenly, all those tools are now available to me pretty cheaply to use, but they're also available to our audience. And while I may be rubbish at using a lot of those tools, I think it's good for all journalists to play with them, to find out what is possible and how it's going to change the way we work and the way our products, as it were, are consumed.
Suddenly we've got this situation where a journalist who used to write things for print, used to record things for radio, make television items like yourself, is now being expected to do a lot more. Do you think it's reasonable, feasible?
I don't think it really is feasible for people to be jack of all trades if they're not master of at least a couple. I think it's good to know about these things. I've got a past as a TV reporter. I now can shoot a little bit of video very poorly, which might just about go on a blog. I can record audio. I've always had to do that. I can edit it reasonably well. I can get a blog post together. But I think it's important that we do two things. We maintain one core skill and we respect the skills of colleagues who do other things. I don't think we're going to produce a really great product for our audiences if we're all doing everything at once. I was speaking to a colleague the other day who said, well, I go out on a story and I'm shooting it these days, and I come back and I think, did I white balance the picture and did I ask that key question? It's difficult to remember to do both things.
With the fact that you can get really good tools at not very high price, which means we have seen this big increase in the number of people who are doing citizen journalism, people doing their own news reporting and blogging, and they're not professional journalists, they're hobbyists, really. Do professionals like you feel threatened by them?
I think we're put on our mettle by that, and we're in some ways, we're ruthlessly exploiting citizen journalists. I mean, I was trying to think of what the definition was the other day of a citizen journalist, and basically it's a journalist that doesn't get paid.
Much like most BBC journalists.
You could say that. I couldn't possibly comment. I don't think there's any need to feel threatened. I mean, we are using them as much as they're using us. I mean, more and more of reporting of breaking stories comes in the form of material that has been gathered on the streets. Look at Iran. Look what's happened in Iran over recent weeks. Look at the attacks on Mumbai. So there will be a whole lot of new material coming in. There is still a very important job, a very important professional job of curating that material, authenticating it, being sure that it's genuine.
Rory Cellan-Jones. So are professional reporters under siege from internet-bred bloggers and other citizen scientists? Ben Hammersley is the associate editor of Wired magazine.
One of the things you find with user-generated content as a general thing, whether it's about science or about anything else, is that it's really quite hard to do. I mean, as you found yourself, actually, it's not simple to do journalism. And so you do get a shakeout of people who aren't very good at it, just find it slightly boring after a while and just stop doing it in the first place. It also creates a whole new industry of recommendation and criticism almost, and lots of opportunities for people to point at other stuff that's particularly good. And what the internet has brought us is a massive internationalization of this. And so whereas before we would have science journalism from only a few outlets and UK-based only, now even just in audio programming, we have excellent stuff from Australia, excellent stuff from America, excellent stuff from many places around the world. That we have a lot to choose from, and because of that, it does really drag the standards up, and then people fall off the end and stop doing journalism. I think one of the things that we've seen in this conference today is the remnants of this belief, which I find personally a little bit strange, which is that it's somebody's right to be a journalist. It's somebody's the fact that the crisis in journalism means that lots of journalists are being laid off or running out of work or whatever, and that's a personal tragedy for those individual people, but that's not something that requires a sort of statewide bailout like the banks or something like that. You know, the world isn't going to collapse if there are fewer journalists, because there are plenty of people every year who want to become them. You know, there's lots of new people coming up. So I think what we're seeing is just a massive increase in quality at the top end. And after a while, you just learn which is really good. And then your life is infinitely more enriched now than it was 5 years ago, because you can listen to amazing psychology programs from Australia and amazing general science programs from the US and programs like yourselves, which you just seriously couldn't have done five or 10 years ago. And that's great. I mean, nothing is bad with that. And if you're producing something that nobody's listening to, then maybe it's time for you to stop and do something else.
Ben Hammersley. So the web raises the bar, at least as far as quality is concerned, but there is now a lot of content out there and a lot of competition. So how do we hang on to our audiences, assuming we've got one in the first place? Rory Cellan-Jones again.
I think there will always be, even in a web world, there will be trusted brands, and the BBC's best hope is to maintain its position as a trusted guide to what's happening around the world. You may not be convinced when you read a tweet from Iran that it's genuine, but you ought to be fairly convinced if you see a broadcast or read a piece written by a BBC correspondent in Tehran that it's true and that it's impartial.
So if you see a tantalising tweet, how do you follow it up and then think, well, we could use that story? How do you then go ahead and check it?
It's very difficult. I think one is foolish to use tweets necessarily as prime sources. They're good indications of what might be going on. For me, a lot of the tweets that I read are from fellow journalists or people who are generally interested in the stuff I follow. This morning I looked at my phone and somebody had tweeted that Swedish journalists were reporting that the Pirate Bay website had been sold. Now, I wouldn't go on air with that, but following it back to the source, it does appear to be true. So it becomes a kind of early warning system rather than an actual source.
But the internet isn't just a source of stories or a way to distribute them, because it can also be a way for wannabe journalists to get noticed in the first place, and quick. Ben Hammersley again.
If you wanted to broadcast to the world 30 years ago, you'd have to have been the one guy working for the BBC. And to become that one guy, you would have had to have gone through decades of an apprenticeship, working your way up. Whereas now, you can make your own programs, produce them to an incredibly high level, and get them listened to. And even if they're listened to by only 50 people, it might be the right 50 people, and then you become, people like yourself. 20 or 30 years ago, there's absolutely no way that a person in their bedroom in the middle of nowhere could have become an internationally listened to reporter on any particular subject. I was one of the first generations of people whose first newspaper job was on a national newspaper.
You clean the floor, did you?
I was indeed my first professional full-time journalism job was as the technology reporter for the Times. And now, previously, being a national newspaper reporter would have taken me 15 years of writing about Women's Institute fates and sort of school plays in the Leicester Mercury, and then slowly making my way up. And we've gone through 200 years of media where it's been written by mates of the producer and friends of the editor and people who went to Oxford with the right guy and all of that. And now we've got a point where the tools to produce professional quality stuff are freely available to anybody, and if your stuff is good enough, then you will get noticed. And if you don't get noticed, if you do fall off the end, even though your stuff is amazing, then you're massively, massively unlucky. But being unlucky is completely different to being in an impossible situation, which you would have been in 10 or 15 years ago.
Ben Hammersley. But some people can't physically get their message out there in the first place, and that's usually because they live somewhere like a third world country. But this is, paradoxically, where new media really can come to the rescue.
My name is Juliana Rotich, and I work for Global Voices Online. Global Voices is an aggregator of content from blogs around the world. It is composed of over 300 authors who do this on a volunteer basis. The tagline is, the world is talking, are you listening? The point of Global Voices is to shed light on areas that are not covered by mainstream media, sub-Saharan Africa, some areas in Asia, China, anywhere in the world where we don't see that many pieces coming out in the mainstream news, yet there's stuff happening and people are talking about it. So we need to listen to what the rest of the world is talking about.
Can you give us some recent examples of how that's really championed various things that have been overlooked by the mainstream media then?
Madagascar is probably the most visceral example of this. There was a cyclone that happened in January 21st, 2009. No one was paying attention to Madagascar. And Global Voices Online was covering that and was seeing the devastation that was happening there through the eyes of the bloggers who were writing in Malagasy, French, and English. And because of our Lingua translation project, their posts were translated and posted online.
So how many people have you actually got producing all this content? How much content have they made?
About 300 authors. It fluctuates, of course, because it's on volunteer basis. We have about 351 categories, more than 10,000 posts growing every day. We have traffic of over 10,000 per day, depending on... Sometimes we do get a lot of traffic, especially when an international incident happens. We've also started to experiment with reporting information that's available on Twitter as opposed to just blogs, because we do see some bloggers using Twitter more often and covering stuff that's happening around the world that we probably should pay attention to.
Who's using it? Is it the people in those areas of need that use it, or is it mainly getting the message across to people in the Western world who might be able to help in areas of need and therefore do something about the problems that you cover? The
target audience is... it's a very broad sharing platform, so it's on both ends. So when you talk about a conversation, the conversation can happen in the West where people could pay attention to it, but it could also happen locally. So sometimes we have the comments, people commenting who are from that particular locality where the story was covered. So it cuts both ways.
And how has the fact that it's got so much easier to capture, publish, distribute information these days, thanks to things like the internet, how has that affected the way that projects like this evolve effectively?
In my opinion, it's grown in importance because as the number of people coming online increase, filtering that information, or at least wrapping your head around it, as it were, becomes a bit of a challenge. So it's going from just being an aggregator to sort of a filter, really, and almost an early warning mechanism, because you have many people talking. Sometimes where do you find the signal? And sometimes the signal could be quite important.
What about the fact that lots of these third world countries don't have very good access to the internet? Is that posing a major barrier?
It is a barrier, yes, it is. But by and large, that situation is also changing. The areas that were in the digital divide, as it were, the connectivity is becoming more and more available, or there are plans to increase connectivity. For example, like with the undersea cable being installed in East Africa, the Seacom cable. It is definitely a challenge. So there are other projects that look at bringing that information through other means. And it's not a Global Voices project, but it was born out of Global Voices because the Ushahidi crowdsourcing platform, the founders of Ushahidi were very much a part of the Global Voices community and have received a lot of support, and it's grown together with Global Voices.
I suppose that access to technology is very important. You've even come equipped yourself today. Are those USB earrings?
Yes, they are.
Can we give us a demo?
Sure. So you just pop it out and you stick it in the USB drive. It's 1 gig each for each side of it.
1 gig per ear?
Yeah, and I do have to mention there's a project out of Budapest. They're called Kitchen Budapest. They rapidly prototype ideas, so this is one of their ideas.
Dressed for any occasion, although please be warned, plugging your earrings into the nearest computer may attract some rather funny looks. That was Juliana Rotic, who's from Global Voices, which is a new media project that helps to highlight issues in less well-connected countries. Another way to boost the profile of science amongst the general population is to get more interactive, which is what African scientists and journalists have been trying to do.
I'm Juliet Mtheu from Kenya. So I work for the Kenya Wellcome Trust medical research program where they do medical findings in Kenya and just finding out how to improve the health of African children and their families.
What are you doing in London?
I'm actually on a placement to the Wellcome Trust. So I'm trying to learn about ways and different measures we can use to translate science to the public, sort of engage the public with science in a more exciting way. So it could be the science cafes, it could be theatre, it could be media press releases which you send out to the media.
What's going on in that respect in Kenya already, if anything?
Well, I'm going to talk a bit about the Kenya Science Cafes, and that's the big thing that's happening right now. And what we're doing is we're setting up forums in cafes like Java and Savannah and getting the public to come. So you have about 72 members of the public, non-scientific backgrounds, and 4 scientists and science journalists who talk about science issues. And it's a serious debate, discussion from the public, asking the scientists real questions like, what's the relevance of your research to me, and individualizing the issues of science. So it's great to see the Kenyan public getting intrigued and getting out there asking the questions we want.
Who comes?
From accountants to unemployed Kenyans to students to lawyers to anybody you could think about off the street, literally.
So it's not just a bunch of science geeks, it's a very broad mix.
It's such a broad mix, you would be shocked if you attended one. You'd go like, oh my God, it's such a broad aspect of professionals coming to these things.
And how do the people who turn up respond? They're not just turning up for a free cup of coffee, they do actually stay and listen to the science.
Well, the funny thing is we have a typical behavior in Kenya. We go for free stuff, but we pay for the coffees and the cakes and the croissant, but people come in. And we're trying to entice them to come in. And you can't sell science. It's really hard to sell science. You can sell it with free food and people come. But the funny thing is after the end of each session, the food is left on the plate because people got intrigued with the discussion. They forgot to eat. And we end up saying to people, okay, you need to take this food away. We've paid for it. So the interest is so intriguing, and it's really good to have people come and just be interacting the whole time.
What about the sort of downstream of people attending one of these events? Do they actually take something positive away from it? Have you got any evidence that it does make a difference to the lives of the average Kenyan who turns up?
Well, that's sort of hard to measure, but what I can tell you is they do spread the word around. And it's funny, we recently had a women's health cafe, and I could have said 95% of the women who came had never gone to a gynecologist. By the time they left, I got texts from people who attended and said, I just went to a gynecologist today to get a pap smear or something. So it's good to see and hear that, but it's really hard to measure it. Measuring it, I'd lie to you. But in terms of also the cafes, they've picked up from having 25 people coming to the cafes to now 72 2, and that's a huge number, and it's growing as time goes by. So, I mean, it went from us begging people to come for these cafes to now telling them, okay, you can't come. There are too many people coming. No, thank you. Wait till the next one.
What about young people? Because, of course, one of the things that you're trying to do in Africa is to build a skill set.
Yeah.
Because if you look at, say, South Africa as an example, per, say, 1,000 people in the population, there's something like 5 scientists. If you contrast that with America, the UK, that number's more like 50. So Africa's dead keen to try and boost the number of scientists. You've got to start with young people. So are you trying to get them into these cafes, not just getting older people who have already made a career choice?
Well, I'll tell you, our age bracket is actually from the age of 18 down to the 74, and obviously we're hitting the 74 for a different reason, to inform them. The 18-year-olds, it's mainly to tell them science is cool and you can have a science career. The thing with the science cafes is that they're currently for the adults, and we're looking at taking them to schools and having junior science cafes. The dynamics and setup of that are still in the planning phase, and funding as well is also a big issue. So once we get funding and once we can push it forward with a sort of action plan for that, then we are definitely going to take them to schools.
Who is funding this kind of thing?
At the moment, I'm happy to say that the Wellcome Trust is through the International Engagement Award. So we're lucky to have some funding for this year and next year. And after that, we will be looking for some more money from the Wellcome Trust and other funders.
What about other African countries?
I was just going to talk about that. At present, we have, I think, about 6 countries in Africa actually doing the science cafe. So you have Uganda, Malawi, South Africa, Egypt, Cameroon, and Kenya, of course. And all of them just started the cafes recently. It's a bit different in each country. So Uganda is mainly big on junior science cafes. So in terms of borrowing ideas, Uganda will be the best one. Cameroon is good in the science journalists are the ones running the cafes. Whereas in Kenya, it's a mass communication officer and myself who's a scientist doing this and pushing it into the media domain. So for every single cafe, we have media coverage. So attention is going out, and we're trying to push it to other African countries in the north and the south as well.
So a new way to use new media to inspire interest in science. That was Wellcome Trust-funded researcher Juliet Mathieu. Now cast your mind back to a little bit earlier in the programme.
Now raise your hand if you've never made a podcast and you're not even sure if you're going to make one. All right, so that's the distribution of motivation here. Hi, what is your name?
Julian.
Where are you from, Julian?
I was born in Madrid, but I live in France.
Can you give me first the evil laugh of the Spanish and then the evil laugh of the French?
No, I can't.
Just give it a try. Was that the Spanish or the French?
Spanish.
Now give me the French.
The French is very silent. They don't laugh.
Indeed, it is John Bohannon's Pimp My Podcast podcasting workshop. Now, John started off by asking participants, as you heard, to imitate the laughs of mad or evil scientists from the countries where those people came from. It was a great icebreaker, although some people were, as you probably gathered, slightly more forthcoming than others. But the key question is, how difficult is it for people in the position of those participants to actually get started with podcasting in the first place?
I reckon it's really easy, and that's my goal today, is actually to show that as long as you're willing to spend a few $100s to get the necessary kit, as long as you've got a functioning human voice and a story to tell, it's no problem.
What about audiences? In your experience, how many people do you get to with this medium, and is it different than people you would get to with a traditional print medium?
Well, it ranges. I mean, you're at one extreme. The Naked Scientists reach 10 million people. But even if you just reach 100 people who are exactly your target audience, I'd say it's mission accomplished.
And what about editors and people higher up the publication's sort of pecking order? How do they view this medium?
Well, that's funny. So I brought in a few editors to interact with my podcasters, and it ranges. Some of them are very skeptical, actually. I've asked them whether if a journalist pitches a good story, and she says, well, I've also got this multimedia bit. I've got some podcast material that I can add to it. Some have said that wouldn't really tip the balance because we're still in a print medium. And others have said that's exactly what we need. So I think there's real variation out there.
So rather than it just being, I write a story, it goes on the web or into print, people are increasingly looking for ways to pollinate their pages on the web or whatever with additional content, and podcasting's one of those ways of doing that.
There's this whole ecology of attention out there, isn't there? Some people are willing to sit down with a 4-page article and just read it right through. Others want to browse a bit and might be doing something that requires their eyes full time, and that's when a podcast fills the niche.
John Bohannon. Well, that session ran twice, and it was absolutely packed on both occasions, full of people who were very enthusiastic to learn more about the whole world of podcasting. And that's probably a reflection on how important journalists think that this whole field of new media is or is becoming. And I spoke to some of them to find out how they plan to use it to fill that very niche.
I'm Sharon Guynup. I'm a freelance writer from New York. I've been a print journalist, and as new media changes the landscape, I have been expanding my skills. I've learned to record broadcast quality audio, and I've learned to shoot HD video, and I also did radio in college. I'm kind of returning to some roots.
So you think that there's a very strong motivation to acquire these skills because this is going to become a much bigger part of that arena?
I think with the advent of web-based news, people want multi-dimensional aspects to their news stories. So I think any additional components that can be added to a news story, be they visual or audio, is really exciting, and I think the public wants it.
You don't think this is going to lead to editors putting undue pressure on their contributors to turn in all these multimedia things?
There already is some pressure in that area, and I must say it is a bit difficult to both get the interviews that you need for a story, sometimes have to shoot photographs, maybe get audio, and perhaps video as well. The audio is a bit easier because chances are you may be recording interviews to transcribe later. So of all of those additional components, audio is perhaps the easiest to integrate into print reporting.
Have you seen any financial impacts in terms of your ability to earn money because of new media?
Absolutely. I was a photographer. I did a graduate program in science, health, and environmental reporting. I graduated 11 years ago, and in those days I could put 2 feature story proposals out, and I'd land one, and would make $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. Today, I probably have to pitch 10 or 15 proposals before I land a story.
Why?
Well, in the U.S., and I'm not sure how this varies in other parts of the world, but in the U.S., so many newspapers have dumped staff, so many magazines have dumped staff, that there is a huge number of freelancers that have gotten dumped into a shrinking pool.
Do you think that's because traditional print has shrunk, therefore advertising revenue has shrunk, therefore the amount they can pay someone like you has shrunk, or is there something else going on?
I think it's just more that there's more freelancers, and yes, advertising revenues have dropped. Some of that is because of the perfect storm of the economic crash that happened at the same time new media was really impacting print.
So what do you think the long-term outcome will be?
I don't know.
Hello, who are you?
Peter Ranscombe.
And what do you do, Peter?
I'm a business reporter with the Scotsman newspaper in Edinburgh.
What's your perspective on podcasting then?
I think podcasting is a new and exciting way of communicating science, and I love the idea that it can fit into people's daily lives. It's something you can listen to in the car, you can listen to when you're commuting, or when you're doing the ironing at night.
Obviously you come at this from a print background. Do you find the whole concept scary?
No, because I grew up with radio and love the idea of radio, and this to me is an extension of radio, bringing radio back to its place.
You don't think there's a danger that journalists are going to have too much expected of them? You've got to be master of print, master of audio, maybe even video?
I think so. One of the points that's been made during the conference is that editors, yes, will want a journalist who can turn their hand to other things, but they have to be good at what they turn their hand to. Maybe they're a good writer and they're also good at podcasts, or they're good at writing and good at taking photographs. I think even editors who want to get the most out of their journalists will still realise they want a quality product, and they can't have one person doing everything if they're going to maintain that quality.
For someone who's enthusiastic about the medium and coming at it from a position of not having done much yet, what are the major fears that you have about it? What do you hope to understand or learn that will basically get you going?
The main fear would be embarrassing yourself is quite high in my mind. As for skills, it's very useful to see some of the software, even if this isn't the software that I'll end up using, it's good to familiarise yourself with that, with the equipment, with the microphone, with the recorders that you're using.
So if there was going to be a checklist of things that you reckon journalists would like to know in order to get going as previously a podcast virgin, what would be on your checklist of things that would be at the top of that list?
If they don't have any experience of radio, then an introduction to the differences between how you put a story together with a spoken voice rather than the written word. But then a lot of writers will hopefully pick that up quite quickly, and then it becomes a question of becoming familiar with the equipment, because we use a pen and a pad. We now use computers instead of typewriters, but perhaps when you plug in a microphone into a recorder and then you've got to get the recorder to talk to the computer, for a lot of journalists that's maybe a step beyond what they would do in their daily lives, and it's good to be familiar with that equipment, how it works, and some of the little pitfalls like changing the MP3 file format so that the software can read it.
So it sounds to me like you're not frightened of the medium, you're more frightened of the gear you need to do it.
Yeah, that would be a fair point. If you're passionate about communicating science, then this is a great tool, this is a new way to do it, but it's getting to grips with how you go about doing that.
My name is Mohammed Yahya, and I'm based in Egypt, in Cairo, and I work for IslamOnline.net. We've been really thinking about having an online internet service on the website for a while now, and we've been gearing up for that and trying to get all the equipment and budgeting it up and everything, but now I'm thinking that maybe that is not exactly the right way to be going right now, because most people right now do not like to tune in to a certain time of the day to listen to something. Most people want to be able to listen to what they want when they want. So that's why I'm thinking maybe a better option would be actually to go podcasting rather than online radio. Maybe we can do both. I'm still thinking about that.
Islam Online is incredibly popular. You have millions and millions of pages that get served. Why is it so popular?
Well, it's good it's popular because we're getting paid for that.
I mean, I didn't mean that in a disparaging way.
Okay.
What's the success story there? Why is that happening?
Well, I would personally attribute it to two factors. It was one of the first Islamically oriented websites basically on the internet, and it's grown into this huge portal. And the thing is that, contrary to a lot of other religious websites, it does not cover religion only. So you've got a religion section, but then you've got a health and science, you've got an art and culture, you've got a section, a tribute to Michael Jackson on right now. So it's really more of a lifestyle website. So everyone who comes in, they find something to listen to, or actually to read or watch or something. So there's something for everyone. That's why there's so many people coming to Islam Online, I guess.
Can you match that success if you went to the podcasting arena?
I really think we do, because Islam Online has got an Arabic version and English version, and the Arabic version, they already have an online internet service, and it's hugely popular. I mean, they get thousands of hits every day, around 20,000 hits every day for the 6 hours that they're broadcasting. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to recreate that in the English website, especially because we really believe that most people don't really have enough time to read now, and they want to do something on the go, like when you're on the tube or you're driving your car, especially back in Cairo we have horrible traffic, so we're stuck in the cars for hours. So that could be actually a very interesting way to offer our material in a different format, in a different way that suits other audiences. So we really think that there is an audience for that.
How are you going to pay for it?
That's a good question. Well, we've been thinking about that, and from sessions I've attended here, it's not too expensive. Well, that's what I understand from you, that it's not too expensive to be hosting a podcast service. So that's one factor, which is very nice. The other factor is that, well, first of all, we probably have the material already from our other services. For example, we've got loads of stuff on the web, and we've got lots of contacts that we can actually call up and ask questions on air. So that would simplify part of the problem. But then on the other side, we still get the way we work is pretty hybrid now, because we used to be working mainly on funding from NGOs, but we've grown up so exponentially we can't do that anymore. So we have a business model where we set up websites and offer services for others. So it's probably going to be one of those two sources. Either we're going to be getting funding for that, or it'll be from the money that we're generating.
And given that you're currently podcast virgins, what do you put at the top of your checklist of things you need to solve in order to make this happen?
Well, personally for me, I have a problem keeping the time down. So, I mean, when we were doing tests for radio, and I'd supposedly have 2 minutes, and then I go overboard for 5 minutes or something, and if that was live radio, I'd be cut off. So that's one of the things I'd really like to do, be able to cut down.
So verbal diarrhea is one problem.
Exactly.
Anything else?
That's one problem, I guess. That's one problem. And the other thing is, right now we have our editor staff, but I don't think that they'd be really appropriate to transfer to the podcasting service because they might not be excited enough, might not give it that feel that we're looking for. So probably we need to recruit new people for that, which would be also another problem.
I'm Laura Garcia Oviedo from Argentina. I'm a freelance and a journalist. I collaborate with a magazine called Muy Interesante in Argentina.
So why have you come to this session on podcasting?
Because I want to learn and have fun also.
So you've never done anything like this before?
Like this, not. I've been trying to produce some podcasts, but I want to learn more and to have more tools.
How did they train you? What did they show you how to do?
We are doing like an exercise to have an idea and then producing it and finally recording it, and now we are going to listen to it. So we are in the middle of the session, of the workshop. So far it's really fun.
Well, laughter makes the world go round, they say. Here's a taster of what one of the groups produced as their 60-second podcast. Apparently, aliens have invaded the moon.
Hi, this is Tasso reporting from Earth. I've landed here behind the UN building yesterday, and I'm asking today the representatives of the nations of Earth, why are they going to punch the face of the moon in October? Here's one from the European Council. Why are you doing this, madam?
We're all really excited about it. We're going to dig for water, and it's going to be really, really useful.
And you, sir, representing Africa, would you still do it if you would know that some people over there, not humans, would be harmed?
Yes, we should do it because it's very good for scientific experiments.
And you, madam, from the Americas, would you still do it if those people on the moon could harm you?
I'm very confident about our superior technology and superior weapons, and we're going to win this war if there is a war.
Well, I'm not really sure about the content, but what I will say is that none of those people had picked up a microphone or edited a single piece of audio before they came to make any of those audio packages. So that was a truly remarkable performance. Very well done. Now, speaking of technology and picking up things that are brand new, where is technology going to go? Here's Rory Kedlin-Jones again.
I wish I could tell you that. I didn't see Twitter coming. I didn't see Facebook coming. What is hot, though, is mobility. Mobile phones are becoming essential tools, not just for journalists, but for everyone to do far more than just talking. Mobile networks are getting a lot better. More and more people, particularly in emerging economies in places like Africa, are going to be getting their information, their news, through mobile phones.
And speaking of mobility, I hope you'll feel moved to come and join us for the next WCSJ meeting in Cairo in 2011. You have been listening to an official NakedScientist.com production. There are more podcasts from the WCSJ meeting in London 2009 on our website at NakedScientist.com, and that includes the official conference video. I'm Chris Smith. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.